Good morning, my students. How are you? I hope all of you are very well. Today we will start with relative clause. Relative clause in English divided into two parts, defining relative clause and non-defining relative clause. Defining relative clause used to identify particular person, particular place, particular thing that we have being talked about. But what are the tool of defining relative clause? The tools are who, which, where, and when, whose, and that. Who, we use who to refer to people. For example, they affect the people who inhabit in the region. Which or that, we use which or that to refer to things or animal. Like, an iceberg is a huge piece of ice which floats in the ocean. Where refer to places. For example, places where there is a tropical climate are near the equator. When refer to time. For example, the month when heavy rain falls follow months of dry weather. We use when because it refers to month. Whose. We use whose to refer to possessive. Like, he's the man whose daughter I met in Jordan. That, we use that to refer to people or thing. For example, areas that have a tundra climate include Russia and North America. We use that because it refers to area. For example, an iceberg is a huge piece of ice which floats in the ocean, which refers to the iceberg. I bought a new car, which is very nice, which refers to a new car. She lives in New York, which or that she like living, refer to New York. I don't like the woman who lives next to the door, who refers to the women. I'm looking for the secretary who can use the computer, the secretary who refers to the secretary, so we use who. Now we will start with non-defining relative clause. Non-defining relative clause are used to give more details about particular person, place, or things that is being talked about. As you know, we have talked about defining relative clause used to give us or to identify particular person or particular place. But non-defining relative clause used to give us more detail about particular person or particular place or particular things. As you know, when we mentioned the articles or the tools of defining relative clause, we said who, which, where, whose, when, and that. But we cannot use with non-defining relative clause that. Now يا عاشر, let's go to this important information. Non-defining relative clauses differ from defining relative clause in that it gives additional rather than essential information, and without it sentence would be still convey meaning. Then defining relative clause give us more important information than non-defining relative clause. Now يا عاشر, look at this example. Geologists, who study earth rocks and how they formed, can read the layers of rock. Now, just we put comma before the relative clause, and at the end we put comma at the end of relative clause sentence. Then we complete the whole sentence. Now يا عاشر, there are three differences between defining relative clause and non-defining relative clause. According to the tools, defining relative clause have that in its tools, but non-defining relative clause we cannot use that. The second second difference between defining relative clause and non-defining relative clause. Defining relative clause used to identify particular person or particular place, but non-defining relative clause used to use more details about particular person or particular people. With defining relative clause, just we put the suitable relative clause instead of full stop. But with non-defining relative clause, we must put a comma before relative clause and at the end of this relative clause sentence. Now, thanks a lot for your listening. Goodbye.